Okay. I'm going to do a little exercise here. If you have to use your imaginations, it may be difficult. Try to imagine you're encountering someone who has never before seen a movie. Kind of hard to imagine, right? That somebody could grow up in the world and know language and other things going on, but has never seen a movie. Try to imagine that. All right, and if you would, then you find out that they're going to their first ever big screen picture show. So they come to you and say, gosh, I'm excited. I don't know what to expect. And you say, well, what are you going to see? Well, down at Harkins, they do some classics every once in a while. And so what if they were going to see It's a Wonderful Life? Yeah, feelings about that. You can say, oh, that's a classic. Well, it might be in color, it might be in black and white, whichever one they show it, but you wouldn't have to really give them much preparation other than pat them on the back and say, have a good time. Same thing would be the case if they were going to go see Sound of Music. Now you might say, well, this is a true historical setting. And so that when you see it, you might give them some context about the history of the overtaking of Austria by Nazi Germany, and that's it. But then you'd pat them on the back and say, go and have a good time. I had to include this one because I think this one is an epic. If they said my first movie ever is called Dances with Wolves, what's that about? And you wouldn't want to give away too much, but you could tell them, well, that took place just after the Civil War era in the west of this country when there were Native Americans and the settlers were at odds with one another. You might tell them about the setting of the time and so forth, but you pat them on the back and say, have a good time. You wouldn't have any concern. What if their first ever picture show? What if they said, I'm going to my first movie and it's called Nightmare on Elm Street? Now, well, I saw some of the grimaces with your face. All right. What would you say to them? Yeah, don't bother. Pick a different one. It's very boring. It's very boring. All right, so you'd say pick a different one. Don't go. If they had to go, you'd probably say, well,
some buttered popcorn.
this is
It'll make everything better.
okay, and you might say this is not representative of all movies. If you go to this one, just know that that's a very specific kind of movie. And know that there are lots of others. I picked another one too. I accidentally watched this one while I was a kid, sleeping in a hotel room or pretending to sleep, and my dad had it on. And I can't remember where we were traveling or whatever, but there was 2 separate beds in there, and I think he thought I was asleep. And this movie ruined me for life. I was terrified because So the same would hold true. He said, boy, you might want to pick a different one to start. All right. Well,
Maybe we'll see another movie.
so if a horror movie was your first ever experience of what movies were all about, you may be very hesitant to even go back to a movie. That person, you might warn them and say, if you see this one first, you might be ruined and not want to go back to a movie. Why don't you try Sound of Music or something else that isn't going to be so drastically strange and disturbing? Okay, very good. Now imagine you meet somebody who's never read the Bible. That's easier to imagine. Okay. You learn that they're going to start reading, and pastors get this once in a while. So where should I start? Where should I start in the Bible? Well, someone when I was young said the Gospel of John is a great place to start. It's not the only place to start. It's not, who knows if it's even the best. But for this pastor, he said, why don't you start in the Gospel of John? And I could go on about that, but we would pat them on the back and say, okay, go ahead.
Pastor Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you share your screen?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I forgot. There was a step that I missed. Oh, good, my sister's here. Thank you, Barbara.
Hello, I was a little bit late. I'm sorry.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Well, we have a second. I want to thank all of you for sending cards. It's been very special.
We all send prayers to you, Kathy. We do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara, for reminding me. I'm sorry about that. You didn't miss much. I just showed pictures that showed which movies I was talking about.
You're welcome.
So, and then we say, well, maybe you could start reading the Bible at the book of Genesis. That's a good spot. And we're familiar enough with that to say there's a lot of meaty stories in there. So we pat them on the back and say, go on your way. What if we said, the first book that you're going to start reading is the book of Revelation? Can you see the comparison? With movies, there are all types of different movies. And the first ones you see can set the tone for what comes next. The same is true with Bible reading. And so we all can agree that Revelation is certainly a type of book in the Bible. It belongs in the Bible. We don't have any problem agreeing to that. But it's so different than some of the others that we say, let's not start there. We also would say, you need some guidance, not only for this, but probably for every book in the Bible. That's why we do this together. God didn't give us this to be lone rangers. God gave us this to be a community so that we could learn from history and from what people learned before us and what people around us come from, and your perspective, which is different than mine. All of that comes together so we have guidance. So we would tell a person, don't start with Revelation. Start with something else and choose a guide to help you through. And then you can work your way into that and know that that's only one type of Bible story and Bible book. So let's be totally honest right now. I want to ask all of you, what are your thoughts and feelings about the book of Revelation? And Kathy, I'm either going to tattle on you or you can tell people yourself what you told me.
She's muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Kathy. Kathy, you're muted. Can you unmute? No, still not hearing you.
How about
Okay.
that? Is that better?
Gotcha.
Okay, well, it's always maybe intimidated me, scared me. I feel like it's crazy. My mother thought whoever wrote it was on drugs. It's just been intimidating. I don't know what exactly I told you, Jim. My brain is kind of fuzzy, but
That sums it up nicely. Okay, any others want to share? What are some confusion? Okay, Larry thinks that it's very confusing.
There's a lot of symbolism in it, and we don't have the clue book to tell us what that symbolism really means.
Okay,
exactly.
yes, all right. So I've had more than one person tell me that it just makes them afraid. It makes them confused or uncertain or intimidated. Jim?
Well, I was a teenager when I first heard about it. I just thought it was very interesting.
Okay,
I read it and it says, once more, we'll lay down with the wolves and what? We used to be able to talk to them. Well, that's cool. That means we had things that were actually taken away from us. And that's what I got out of it.
interesting. Okay. Well, and that's true. Not everybody has the same reaction or feeling about it. It's like horror movies. I don't go see horror movies. I can't deal with it. Other people eat them up and have no problem with them. And that's fine. People have a different approach. And some people are more in tune to be able to handle certain types of movies or certain types of scripture. The people in the time of Revelation were especially in tune to handle this kind of literature. It was popular at the time. We're going to explore that. It wasn't something that filled the audience with fear and dread. It filled them with hope and with a sense of having things revealed to them. So my goal is that we can take our honest feelings about the book of Revelation, whether it's confusing to us, whether it's intimidating or frightening, or just downright avoidable. I'm hoping that after we spend some weeks on this, you'll walk away and say, I've got the tools now. I can do a much better job of being able to go to this movie, the Revelation movie, than I thought I could ever, because I think we're gonna hopefully reveal to you some real keys that take away some of the intimidation and add to it some real perspective that will be helpful. I would add to that, one of the things that intimidates people about Revelation in our circumstance is the way that other Christians interpret it to us. And there are many different ways that other Christians interpret Revelation. And just to hear other people in their, whatever their energy is when they try to interpret Revelation, can be intimidating or confusing to us as well. And if you're like me, if someone seems to understand something and I just can't get it, I kind of shrink away. I feel like there's something wrong with me. But God works differently with different people, and we come to understanding at different times. So this is going to help you to understand what some of the other perspectives are and how we can walk along with this and say, I understand now why this is the culminating book of the Bible. And I understand why it's there for our comfort, which you may think is insane at this point, but we'll get there. So, how do people with our feelings about the book of Revelation treat the book of Revelation? So you can be honest about how have you treated the book of Revelation? Anybody? You start and stop. Okay. Yeah. And after you stop, do you go back?
Like, I talked to Pastor Perry about it, and I tried doing the using of a guide.
Okay. Yeah. So it's so intimidating. You start, you stop, and even sometimes when you try to get some guidance, that doesn't help very much. And so, like a confusing map, you think, well, this must not be something I can grasp or deal with. But try again is what I say. All right. Many Presbyterians treat Revelation by ignoring it. We just don't deal with it. You know, if we do, there's one verse here or there, but we just, you know, we kind of tiptoe around it and just pretend it's not there. And that's not really something I think that is healthy for us. And it's not necessary, that's for sure. So in this series of classes, I'm hoping that I'll give you tools to help you lay aside any fears that you may have, and that this class will help you better understand various interpretations, and even maybe start to be able to make some of your own interpretations here together as a group. So that's our goal. Now, this is a famous painting. I just included it for ambiance here. It's St. John the Evangelist on the Isle of Patmos. This painting was created by Alonso Cano somewhere between 1646 and 1650. Just there for a reference. We don't know what John looked like, but it gives you an idea that this book was written by somebody who claims to be named John, and that person was exiled because of that person's faith, exiled to the Isle of Patmos. All right, so that's a clue about the book that we have. Well, the word revelation implies, oh, something's going to be revealed. It'll be comprehensible. And yet our experience seems to lead us to believe that it's incomprehensible. It's incomprehension rather than understanding if we come at it from our perspective and don't know anything about the people who first received it and what their perspective was. That's going to open the door to us. Trust me. So there's a paradox then. It's revelation. It's supposed to reveal something, but it seems rather instead for us to provide more mystification, much more than enlightenment. And that's actually on purpose, because when this was written, the persecution of the people was happening, and they needed to be able to convey a message that their audience can understand, but their non-audience, who might turn them in, who might have them, beaten or stoned, they didn't want them to understand at all. we kind of stand more in tune with those people who didn't understand at all. We don't have to. Right? We have the clues that will get us to the place where it's, now I can see why they use this kind of imagery and language. And we kind of have more of their perspective. So we're going to get there. Okay, the revelation of Jesus Christ, according to the New International Bible, gives a dazzling impression. Well, what's dazzling mean? To dazzle is ultimately to prevent sighted speech. I was dazzled. I was dumbstruck. All right. To be dumbstruck can be a condition of awe. All right. So now dazzling with its great brightness and imagery and fantasticalism, it has a purpose. And so this is conveying to us this kind of awe that leaves us bewildered, dumbstruck. It's not a bad thing in all circumstances. Oftentimes it can be a good thing. So we will look at the literary forms that were employed in Revelation and how they are intended to evoke feelings of awe and hope and urgency and comfort. How many of you ever thought comfort would be found in the book of Revelation? All right, so we got at least Jim, who started out, he's my horror movie expert. He's the one that he can go to Nightmare on Elm Street, over and over again and not have nightmares. But for me and for the rest of us, it can be intimidating. But I'm going to add to this, ironically then, if its idea is supposed to provoke awe, wonder, urgency, hope, and comfort, ironically, instead for us, it seems to provoke fear, even distaste, which leads us to avoidance and misunderstanding rather than comprehension. So you see, that's the opposite of what the word revelation is all about. So we know there's something wrong with this picture. Why aren't we getting it? We need the perspective of the people who first received it. So guidance is extremely helpful and necessary to get us to understanding. Pastor Jim's going to try and do his best to be a guide that helps you open this book with a smile on your face and with greater understanding that comes through time. So now I'm going to give you some words. It's up to you if you want to study these, write them down, or if you just want to hear them and move on. There's lots of detailed groundwork I have to give you before we get to the meat. But I'm going to be using these words, and so you need to know something about what they mean. The word is apocalypse, which means a revealing. Any Jew at the time knew that this word apocalypse, apocalyptic, meant revealing something that's going to happen at the end time, the end of the world. So when you hear the word apocalypse, that gives you a clue as to what we're talking about. There's a scholarly word called eschatology. And if you hear me use eschatology, all that means is that it's dealing with the end times. So eschatology is usually writing that deals with the subject of what's happening in the end. The book of Revelation deals with this in the sense of God's sudden breaking in. We need to do a whole week on the day we will in the future. God's breaking in. And when that happens, or did happen, or will happen, or both, that's a clue for us. But eschatology is talking about the end times. We pretty much knew that. We knew that Revelation has something to do with the end times. Even if
How you feeling?
okay, make sure everybody mutes if you're on please mute. Okay, so in the period of
So did you get that message from that Tammy with the knock? I don't know. I mean, I heard he mentioned something about doing a catch thing, but I mean, we haven't done anything yet.
Can we tell who's on Zoom, who's not?
I don't know. I mean, I know he mentioned that this one thing this Saturday, they might be doing a catch
I
thing, but
believe
I'm
it's
like, I
Donna
don't wanna,
Monson.
you know,
Can you
we're
please
not even
mute?
sure if we're gonna do.
Donna.
So. Time to respond, but.
Okay, I think, thank you for that. I can do it from here. Okay, so the period of apocalyptic eschatology begins about 200 BC. That's after pretty much the entire Old Testament is finished by about 350 BC, with an exception of the book of Daniel, but at least gives you an idea. There's some examples. Daniel, Mark chapter 13 is apocalyptic. So it goes into this strange kind of imagery and writing. Matthew 24 and Luke 21. Even in Paul's letters in 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians, you get smatterings of apocalyptic eschatological writing, which is symbolic and refers to the end times. So those are those $10 words that can be confusing. And there's another one that I need you to know about, and that's apocrypha. It comes from the Greek apokryphos, which comes from the Greek apokrytein. And what that broken down means, apo, the first three letters, means away. Krytein means to hide, hidden away. So originally the literal meaning of apocrypha is hidden away. And interestingly, that was the first understanding of what apocrypha was. Apocrypha are works usually written of unknown authorship and of doubtful origin. So we don't know the author and we don't know what their motivation was, if they're legitimate for what they purport to do. At first, the word apocryphal was applied to writings which were kept secret because they were thought to be vehicles of esoteric knowledge, considered to be too profound or sacred to be disclosed to anyone, to the uninitiated. That's what it was first listed as when that word was used, way even before the times of literature that we're talking about. But the meaning changed. We've observed how words' meanings can change over time. And this is how we, and even people in Bible times understood it. Apocrypha was later applied to writings that were hidden, not because they were divine, but because of their questionable value to the church. And so they were controversial. These writings came along, and you'll see in an example I give you why people say, well, this really doesn't do what it says it does, and it's really of questionable value to the church. In general use, the word apocrypha has come to mean false, spurious, bad, or heretical. Well, I don't think we have to go that far with the Apocrypha. There is a group of books called the Apocrypha. And all we can say about those is they are of questionable origin. That's not so, we're not saying they're bad or heretical, of questionable origin. They are in what was called the Septuagint, and I remember studying that with you. That's when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek by 70 scribes. That's where you get the word Septuagint. And they included the Old Testament books that we know, but they also included the Hebrew writings that had now existed, called the Apocrypha, and then the New Testament. That today is the basis of the Catholic Bible. So, in ours, you can say, okay, I understand. They have included, based on the Septuagint translation, they have included all those translations, including these books that we say are of questionable origin, and we call them the Apocrypha. All right, Susanna and Tobit, and there's all kinds. And the Protestant church doesn't look down on those. They just say, well, they're not inspired like the rest of Scripture, but they're very helpful. And we'll find out, hopefully in this class, I'll get to it, we'll find out, yes, it is very helpful for telling us, the perspective of the time. But I want to at least get you I'm going to be using that word. So what I'd like to do now is test out our vocal cords. All right, I'm going to, now, Pastor Jim's favorite hymn of all time is Holy, Holy, Holy. Why that is, I'm not sure, but it may have to do with something very strange that happened in our little Presbyterian church in Marengo, Illinois one summer. We sang Holy, Holy, Holy as the opening hymn all summer long. I don't know if that was a mistake, if the typewriter was broken and they couldn't do the bulletin for the next week. I'm not sure why they did that. At the time I was a kid, I didn't question it, but boy, did I learn that song. I learned to sing it in parts. And so when I was singing my children to sleep, I didn't sing the usual, I sang holy, holy, holy. Or breathe on me, breath of God, or some of these things. So that's what they got. So let's try it together. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty.
Early in the morning, our song shall rise to thee. Holy, holy, merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity.
Holy,
Holy, holy, all
sins of thee, casting down their golden
golden crowns around the glassy sea. Seraphim and seraphim falling down before thee, who word and art and evermore shall be.
holy, holy,
Holy, holy, through the darkness hide thee, through the eyes of sinfulness thy glory may not see. Only thou art holy, there is none beside thee, perfect in power, in love and purity. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, all thy works shall praise thy name, and sky and sea. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in three persons, blessed Trinity.
Well, I did all 4 verses of that, not only because it's my favorite hymn, but Renee was smiling so much I couldn't stop. In fact, I think I saw smiles on lots of people's faces. How many of you were terrified singing that song? No, but well, maybe you were sitting in front of Steve singing. So maybe Larry was terrified of Steve singing, but otherwise.
Scared about it.
Which Steve? Steve what? Not Steve. Oh, I didn't mean to offend him. Okay, so nobody was terrified singing that. In fact, many of us had smiles on our faces. Did you know that you were just in the book of Revelation?
No.
Yes. That comes from the book of Revelation. So now when you read Revelation, Pastor Jim is going to say, try not to feel like I'm in the land of the lost here and this is awful, or I'm terrified. Instead, feel like you're singing holy, holy, holy. That, when we're done with this, should be the mood that you have when you read Revelation. So that's why I wanted to include that. Interpreted in many ways. Now, here's one of the key, and this is brilliant. Pastor Jim came up with this, or maybe Dr. Ray Martin did, and I'm just taking credit. Okay, so I want to look at this painting, which is a famous painting. You don't have to know who did it at this point. I'll let you know. But I just want to get your reactions to this painting. What do you see there, literally?
Mother and baby.
A mother and baby. In fact, it's called Mother and Baby. It's the name of the painting. Excellent. All right. What feelings do you associate with this painting? Just looking at it.
Motherly love,
Motherly love.
child for its mother.
That baby's reaching for her.
Yeah, the baby is reaching for the mother, and that gives us feelings of connection and warmth. Okay. Curiosity. Yeah, tenderness. Okay, so and the baby's nice and fat. So. No, that's good. A plump baby at that time, that was considered to be, yeah, you're doing the right things. Okay, so that's the painting. The artist is Picasso.
Okay.
Wow.
Really?
Picasso?
Okay, so here we have someone, who, once you hear the name Picasso, you think, oh, forget it.
No, I didn't like it to begin with, but that's why, because I didn't like his work. so-
Yeah. Okay, but it gives us a certain feeling, and we can look at this and we can make observations about that painting. I'm going to show you another painting when I ask what feelings you associate with this painting and what you see in it. Creepy, okay, so it gives you a feeling of creepiness. What, Jim?
I got the Salvador Dali since I saw it.
Oh, it reminds you of a different artist, okay?
Picasso again.
Startling.
Startling. What literally do you see there?
It's that.
Woman
Yeah.
smoking a cigarette.
A woman smoking a cigarette.
No, there are tears.
Sadness, okay, we see some tears, so we can get sad. And we think it's a woman.
It's scary.
Yeah, it's, I think he's biting her nails, I don't know. But it's hard to tell literally what all that is,
Terrified.
but yes,
Sitting in a pew in church at a funeral.
okay, sure. So now, but the idea is this, so you associate some feelings with this. And what Renee feels may be different than what Lois feels, but that gives us different feelings than something like this.
Right.
Just like the different movies have different vehicles and how they get things across. Well, the artist for this one, oh, didn't want to do that. Went the backwards way. This also is Picasso
Right.
in a later period. I looked at art like this, forget it. I mocked it. I went on a high school trip to an art museum and I said, this stuff that is selling it for $400,000, it's worthless. There were other things that drove me away from it. I didn't, because I wanted it to be more like a painting of the mother and baby. I wanted it to be something I could grasp and enjoy or appreciate the artwork or get a good feeling from it. This to me was finger painting. I thought it was crazy. Well, it wasn't until I went to Spain on my sabbatical in 2019. And I went to the wonderful art museums in Spain. And there was the original artwork called Guernica that Picasso did around a certain war that was happening. And it's a big mural. And I went and stared at it for a long time. And the light bulb started to come on. And for me, all these, because what it was, you could tell there were women and children and farm animals, but it was all like this. It was in black and white. But they were all broken up into little pieces. And I thought, what is that? Well, it started to come to me. What he was doing was, first of all, conveying a feeling of what those people felt when their village was bombed. And boy, you got that feel, that one was effective. But he also, in writing this, and I may not have it down completely, but it helps me, that all these little pieces, especially in the work Guernica, are as if you were looking from a different perspective. I'm seeing this person from this angle, but on this little piece of the, I'm seeing from this angle or from up above. And that's why all the pieces are there. It's not one angle, it's hundreds of angles. Well, okay, I'm using this as a way to say, this is the book of Revelation. The other books, many of them may look like the mother and baby, and we feel more comfortable, feeling like we can interpret that. We need a guide to tell us in Revelation, this is what this looks like. It certainly brings out feelings. What am I to make of it? Symbolism and so forth. Well, I compare it to abstract art. It doesn't make it useless, or certainly people value it, and those that come to understand it value it greatly. And I was so pleased that the light bulb came on to me, at least, not that I love it, but I understand it and can go forward. So, so that's my first brilliant, or Dr. Martin's, if I'm stealing his idea, way of helping you to say, all right, now I know why Revelation is so different. It's like abstract art, and I'm going to have to learn to look at it a different way. And that's what our guide is going to try and help us do. So hopefully you're feeling more enlightened with every slide. All right, some facts about Revelation. It was written in the 1st century. We think about 96 AD. So all the gospels may have been written by them. We think possibly Gospel of John hadn't been, but that's under dispute. We'll just say this was the last of the New Testament books that were written. Many of Paul's letters were written first, the Gospels then followed, and then Revelation. Okay, the authorship, even though in the book it says John of Patmos, John the Apostle, the authorship is disputed because it was not unusual at the time for someone to write in the name of someone that they wanted to use their weight to get their message across. And today that's called illegitimate. You know, I couldn't do that. But in those times, that was often legitimate. If you were a follower of the Apostle Paul and had done that for years, you could write in his name and people would accept that. So, but the authorship is disputed. And the book of Revelation was not added to the Bible canon, which is the list of approved books for the Bible, New Testament specifically. It didn't get added until much later than most of the other books because it was so controversial and because they thought that it could be misused. So because its inclusion in the Bible was disputed by many, it was only at the Council of Carthage in 397 AD that they finally agreed this is inspired, it belongs at the culmination of the New Testament. Because of that, and that delay, we lack commentary on it by the early church fathers who wrote extensively on most other books of the Bible. So in the years between 100 and 397, you had early church thinkers who were very inspired, like Origen, and some of the other names are escaping me, but they have written extensively commentaries on Old Testament books and New Testament books. But they wrote very little on Revelation because it had not yet been given the status at that time. There are little comments here and there. They were aware of it, but they didn't do it extensively. And that's to our detriment because we have their perspective on all the other books of the Bible, but we have to go at Revelation without that added perspective. And that's too bad.
And this is the last, this is the last book that was added?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's pretty late. Okay, I'll keep it up there for a while if you need to see it. Okay. Just letting people take notes here, so we'll pause a second, and when they're ready, we'll move ahead.
In high school, I wish I could remember.
Okay.
High school, I still think.
All good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is going to be key for us, and we're spending a lot of time on it. I'm going to go over time today. You might have to stop me. Revelation is unique in the Bible in that it occupies 3 different genres of literature. It's totally unique that way. And I'm going to tell you the 3 different genres. So again, with movies, well, we can say if this is a documentary, that's a genre of movie. If this is a musical, that's a genre of movie. If it's a silent film, that's a genre of movie, and so forth. If it's a horror movie, or if it's a fantasy or science fiction. So those are different genres of one thing, movies. All right, well, Revelation has 3 different genres of biblical writing, all as one, and there's no other book in the world that we know of, before or since, that occupies these 3 different genres. The first one is it's an epistle. You've heard me use the word epistle before. I was going to quiz you on what it means, but it's already up there. An epistle is written in letter form, right? It's written by an author intended for a specific audience. Just like many of the New Testament books, when you think about it, most of the New Testament books are epistles. Even the Gospel of Luke was written to Theophilus, and the book of Acts that follows. So most of the books of the New Testament are epistles, letters. Well, Revelation is definitely an epistle, and we'll see that in, if you want to open to it, you're welcome, Revelation chapter 1. Revelation is going to be an easy book for you to find, since it's the final one in the Bible. And if you want to follow along, we'll see that it calls itself an epistle, and it has the forms that prove it's an epistle. So in verse 4 of chapter 1, it says, this letter is from John to the 7 churches in the province of Asia. Grace and peace to you from the one who is, who always was, and who is still to come, from the sevenfold Spirit before his throne, and from Jesus Christ. So it's from John, but he's saying it's also from Jesus. That is in Revelation chapter 1, verses 4, and then the first part of verse 5. And of course, it's from the New Living Translation, which contractually we have to say is the official translation of Ethel McCarty, so she can get her royalty checks for it. Many take this opening to indicate that the author was John the Apostle. So you might just say, okay, well, it says it right there. And you can believe that. We don't know for sure if it was John the Apostle or someone writing in his name. We can't prove it. John the Apostle may have been the last surviving member of the 12. Okay. It says to the churches in the province of Asia. Well, when we think of Asia, we think of China and Thailand and Vietnam and Korea and all those kinds of things. Asia at that time was not Asia as we know it. Asia was a Roman province, also known as Asia Minor. Today it's known as Turkey. So that could throw you off if you were thinking Asia. Oh, I guess it made it all the way over to Taiwan. No, it was in the area of Turkey that these 7 churches existed. The 7 churches are named in verse 11, and you can look at those if you want, but for the most part, they no longer exist. In fact, in many cases, the cities themselves no longer exist. With the exception, 2 of the churches have in some form reemerged, which is interesting. And you'll see that there's something that's maybe a coincidence that goes along with that, maybe not. But it's written to 7 churches that became extinct at one point. Just as a side note, there does exist currently a fellowship in Philadelphia. One of the cities. Philadelphia means brotherly love. And there is a fellowship that apparently meets there. I don't know if it's considered a church in Philadelphia, but there is at least a legacy to the original church that became extinct, but then was resurrected in this form. There's also a church in Smyrna now, which not in Smyrna, they call it Izmir these days. But there's a church there that is also kind of a descendant of that early church. The church became extinct, but then came back in this form in those 2 places. Really interesting. All right. The book of Revelation opens as a letter, and it closes with the typical mark of a letter or an epistle, just like Paul's letters. You can almost hear Paul saying these things. At the end, it says, may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with God's holy people. So there's the close of the letter. Beautiful. Well, and that tells you that the author didn't write this to scare the bejesus out of the people he was writing it to. He was writing it for other purposes that they got, and hopefully we can get as well. Okay, in addition to being an epistle, and I'm doing this because we tell you these 3 different genres, each one of them is going to have clues for us that are important for how we're supposed to interpret it. That's why I'm taking the time to do this. All right, Revelation is also a prophecy. There are books in the Old Testament that are prophecies. Zechariah is a prophecy. Most of the books we have contains of prophecies, but the whole book isn't prophecy. But Zechariah is an example of one that is. Okay, and so you back up to verse 3, it says, God blesses the one who reads the words of this prophecy to the church. And he blesses all who listen to its message and obey what is said, for the time is near. That's really interesting. We'll have to wrestle at some point in the future with when this book opens, it talks about these things are happening soon. The time is near. We'll have to wrestle with that. Is what happened in Revelation something that's already occurred? Is it something that's going to occur in our future? Is it occurring right now as we speak? And different Christians hold all of those different interpretations. All right, we'll get to, but it's confusing. But this is what it said to the original audience, and we'll find out, well, why did he say that to them when it's so confusing to us? We'll find that out. Okay, so this is unusual. No other epistle in the Bible, no other letter is a prophecy. This is the only one. And there are no epistles in the Old Testament. That was a New Testament form of writing. Because John says that this was the message he received from Jesus, it's much like the oracles we find in the prophets. In the prophets, they would introduce their prophecy with the saying, thus says the Lord. There you go. Yes, good, Patty. She was able to mimic that with great pomposity. Thus says the Lord, and then the prophecy would follow. That's what Revelation is doing. Thus says Jesus, who showed me these things. All right, so that's why John says this is a prophecy. All right, Revelation is the only book of prophecy in the New Testament. Interesting. We have books of prophecy in the Old Testament. There are some prophetic statements scattered throughout the New Testament, but none that is the whole book, a book of prophecy. The Old Testament, as I mentioned, doesn't have any epistles, but Revelation it occupies both offices. I got this in a presentation from a guy, Steve Gregg, who seems to really know his stuff. An epistle is directed to a primary audience. I'm writing this letter to you, the people in Corinth, Paul said, and it may have applications for other people, but its primary application is for those first hearers. And that's important because we have to interpret all epistles that way. We interpret Revelation as written to these specific people. Here's what it meant to them. Then we can say, I wonder what it might mean to us. What applies to us and in what way? But first we look at what it meant to them. That's what we do with epistles, because we have to pay attention to the primary situation that was going on for the author and the audience. We won't understand an epistle, therefore, unless we understand something about the situation of the primary audience. So if you were to look, for example, I mentioned 1 Corinthians, okay? You really can't understand 1 Corinthians until a guy tells you, here's what was happening in Corinth. This is what the situation of the church was. Here was the makeup of the people. These are the disputes they were having. These are things that we've studied and learned. And once you know what's going on, now you can hear their mentor writing them a letter addressing these situations. And it makes a whole lot more sense knowing what Paul meant for them. Then we can say, well, the epistle was written to them, but we might recognize that the message can be applicable to a broader audience too. And that's the case in all the epistles, because the church decided, yes, it was written to a specific group, but this has applications for the whole church of all time. So there are legitimate things we can get out of it, but if we skip to that first and don't look at what it meant to the first people, we often get into trouble. So Revelation has to be interpreted in a way that has relevance to the initial audience. So when you start saying, well, this symbolism is driving me crazy, well, it wasn't written for you and your mindset at this point. What did it mean to them? Well, that makes me open the door and have a much more open mind. It may have additional relevance to others beside that. We may be able to get some meaning for our lives, but that's only secondary. We've got to do our work first. So that's an epistle. What's a prophecy? In 1 Corinthians, it says, one who prophesies strengthens others, encourages them, and comforts them. A person who speaks in tongues is strengthened personally, Paul says. But a person who speaks a word of prophecy strengthens the entire church. It's meant to edify. I like that word that comes from the New American Standard. Apologies to Ethel. Edifies, exhorts, and comforts. How many of you thought prophecy was intended to comfort? I thought prophecy was to say, you better shape up or I'm going to burn your britches. Okay, so prophecy is intended to strengthen or build up the community of faith, always. Interesting. So Revelation was written to do those things, to build up the community, to encourage them and give them comfort. Prophecy itself is seen as having two elements. And this is the one that I think is 90% or more of prophecy, and that's preaching. Prophecy is faithful preaching. It's exhortation, edification, words to build up the community, right, to help the community form and stand and grow and withstand things. So I think faithful preaching is prophecy. Part of it also, and he calls this forthtelling, which I think is useful. So part of prophecy is forthtelling, preaching. The other part, which I think is lesser, but is still there, is prediction. Right? Foretelling is the word that he used. Most prophecy is primarily preaching. It denounces unjust and idolatrous situations. Okay, you can see that in the prophets. And so if Pastor Jim on the pulpit bangs his fist one day and says, you people have to shape up about not paying your taxes or whatever, you know, if I have to get after Tom again, or idolatrous behaviors, that's incumbent upon me as a preacher to call that out. Not to scare you to death, but to shape and grow and hopefully encourage you and others who are paying their taxes to come along and know that God is watching. And then that time of preaching then can be peppered, I like that word, with prediction. Here's what I foresee happening if we go down this path. Right? Prophets did that all the time. The prophets had their immediate circumstances in mind. Sometimes God had things centuries out in mind. Hence the prediction of the virgin birth. Isaiah said the young woman is with child. She was there standing with him. That's what he was talking about. Through translations, Mark gets a hold of it, Matthew gets a hold of it. The virgin is with child. Well, God intended that, I believe. Isaiah didn't, but God used his faithful preaching, and there was a predictive quality to it, both in his circumstance and down the road in God's intention. That's how Pastor Jim looks at it. So in the early chapters of Revelation, and you may be brave enough to go home and start reading a little bit, all right, before we come back next week. And if you are, you'll see that in the early chapters, the preaching or forthtelling generally follows a pattern. And now John is quoting Jesus here, and he's talking to each of the 7 churches in the province of Asia or Turkey. And so he starts out by saying, I know your works. So every time he addresses a specific church, the church in Sardis, the church in Philadelphia, I know your works. So he's going to follow a pattern. Okay, then he might have some positive things to say. I know your works, and I see that you are being faithful in persecution, and so forth and so on. Let's say some positive things. Often that is followed with, I also have these things against you. So a good preacher is going to say, here's where you're falling down. And this is going to lead to consequences. You need to shape up your act here. So that's the pattern. I know your works. This is the good. This is the bad. But there are some exceptions to the patterns when you read. Interestingly, when Jesus says to Smyrna, and Philadelphia, those two churches, he says only good things. Now, you can speculate the coincidence that today we have churches that exist in Philadelphia and Smyrna or Izmir. Whether that has to do with they only had good things to say about them, you can decide. All right. Interestingly, when we got to Sardis and Laodicea, he didn't say any good things. He only said bad things. But look for those patterns, and then the exceptions will stand out as having more meaning. Either way, it was clearly showing us that this letter, this epistle, was speaking directly to their present situations at the time. So this letter was for the 7 churches and what they were facing. And they each had things that were good about them or bad about them. And Jesus was speaking to them to be truthful, but then to build them up and to show them the way, to encourage them, and even bring comfort to them who were suffering. In chapters 4 and 5, then, you get into this vision that John is swept up into a vision of heaven, as if Jesus takes him there firsthand. In this vision of heaven, he sees an occupied throne. We don't hear who occupies the throne right away. And it's surrounded by the 24 thrones with the elders seated around them. Now, we can already start to speculate, well, who's that? What does that mean? We're probably getting ahead of ourselves. We would have to say, who would that mean to the people in the church? Just as a nugget, you might say, well, the 12 on the one side represent the 12 tribes of Judah or Israel, and the 12 on the other side represent the 12 apostles. So now you have the Jewish people and New Jerusalem, the new church. I like that, but because I like it doesn't make it authoritative. But that's there. And then, as Steve Gregg says, there are gazillions of angels in this vision, and everyone is praising and singing. And what are they singing? Holy, holy. All right. In fact, when we sing holy, 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 it says we're casting down our golden crowns around the glassy sea. Well, you'll find that when you read Revelation. Cherubim and seraphim falling down before thee. All right, that's the vision of Revelation. So again, we're having this holy, holy, holy mood while we're reading the book that used to scare us. And then it says the Lamb is praised for being the only one who is worthy to open this mysterious scroll. All right, remember, we're in a genre that is both epistle and prophecy. And I'm going to give you a third one as we come up. And that's why are they telling the story in such a weird way? This is like a Picasso painting. Why don't you just tell me what's going on instead of giving me all these symbolic strange things? Well, that's not what they wanted to do for various reasons. So when the Lamb then opens the scroll, that's when the predictive portion begins. We've had preaching up to this point. Now we get some of the prediction that comes in Revelation. So how badly am I losing you? Are you swimming in deep water here?
Who does the Lamb represent?
We'll get to that. Yeah, who does the Lamb represent? I want to keep going, and I will unless Larry tackles me. So in addition to being an epistle and a prophecy, Revelation is an apocalypse. Yikes. When I saw the movie Apocalypse Now, I couldn't even watch the movie because the title scared me so much. Right, apocalypse, what a scary word. Well, it comes from the actual name of the book, Revelation. In Greek, if you were to read the title of the book, it's Apocalypsis. So that's the title of the book, Apocalypsis. It's an apocalypse. Interesting. The Catholic Bible calls it the Apocalypse. Why? Because they transliterate the Greek. They just say, okay, it's apocalypsis, so we call it the apocalypse, the English version of that. So that's not wrong. That's a transliteration. But the Protestants go a little deeper, and they say, we're not going to transliterate it, we're going to translate it. Apo means away from, and calypsis means the veil, or take the veil away, to reveal. That's where we get Revelation. We remove the So we don't have to look at the Catholics and say they've got something wrong. They don't have to look at us and say we've got something wrong. They're both correct. One's a transliteration and one is a translation. It means what has been hidden is being revealed. Well, that's great. I want some things revealed. I'm so confused. And then I read this and I got more confused. What is that? But what this is saying to the people of that time, they were able to receive this as something that was revealing something to them that had been hidden. This was a message from Jesus through John the Apostle that was showing them things that had been hidden up to that time. And if we can get enough into their mindset, we might be able to see some of those things ourselves. Apocalyptic literature is a genre unto itself, and it was prevalent for 300 years between 200 BC and 100 AD. Many Jewish and Christian apocalyptic writings were composed at this time, which we call basically the intertestamental period. After the Old Testament was pretty much concluded and before the New Testament was begun, for the most part. They didn't call it apocalyptic writing. They didn't have a name for the genre. They just did it. And we applied that later as a scholarly term. But they did call it a revealing or an apocalypsis. Well, it was very poetic, as we have observed. It's very symbolic and sensationalistic. So it's not just revelation. We can find hundreds of writings that follow this pattern. Have any of you heard graphic novels? Okay, I only know that because of my son. They're glorified comic books. They're written like comic books, but they're written as books. That's a whole different thing that I didn't grow up with, right? So apocalyptic literature was a whole different thing it caught on like wildfire. And it used these types of sensationalism, symbolism, and poetry. Well, it described the struggles of Jewish people at the times, or the Christian people at the times, and it was always based in their persecution. So this was popular in the times when these people struggled with persecution, whether it was a Jewish writer in a book that ended up in the Bible or a book that didn't end up in the Bible, or the same thing with the Christian who later wrote. And so they have those characteristics in common. And they do things like they depict supernatural beings who guide the author around some strange place and explain visions to them. That was common to this. Well, we might say, well, that's really weird. Well, somebody who watched movies in the 40s, if we brought them to today and showed them the Marvel character series, everybody's jumping around with superpowers. Well, why would you do that? Well, it would be a different feeling for them because they're not used to it. This was their way of telling stories, and they had good reasons for it. But it's strange to us, so we have to come to terms with that strangeness. They employed the imagery of monsters, dragons, planets exploding, stars falling. It was just like everything was going to pot. And we know that the strange symbolism that was used to describe very real and earthly things that were going on, remember, it's a letter. I know what's happening to you in Smyrna. I know you're suffering from persecution. That's a very real and describable thing that could be put in a documentary. But instead, I'm going to describe it through dragons and earthquakes and all that kind of stuff. All right. The struggles between the people and their persecutors were expressed in these sensational forms. Why did they employ such strange symbolic language? We don't fully know, but we have some guesses. By the time Revelation was written about the end of the apocalyptic period, it was a flash in the pan. By that time, it was already a widely recognized and wildly popular form of literature. So the people that received the Revelation in the first time, this was like getting another graphic novel that they'd gotten hundreds of before. They knew how to read that genre. And they were much more in tune with it than we are, because it's not something that we were exposed to in the same way. But Christ apparently chose apocalyptic language, this genre, to convey this message. A more modern comparison would be from a non-inspired writer who's very good, C.S. Lewis. He wrote in the genre of fantasy. And so he employed mythological characters and figures and fictional settings, talking lions and all kinds of stuff like that. But he used those methods rather, to convey a Christian message. I get my words mixed up. So you can see how you can use a genre that is fantastical and fictional with a real and truthful message inside. Same with Revelation. Fantastical, fictional stuff with a very real message inside. The second gem here, hopefully soon. We have available to us an excellent example of apocalyptic writing in a book that is not found in the Protestant Bible, but is included in the Catholic Bible, or what we call the Apocrypha. And this is the second brilliant clue that I think is going to say, oh my gosh, why didn't I know this before? Hopefully it comes across that way. There was one paragraph that was written as a prologue to the book of Esther. Well, we know the book of Esther, no problem, but what prologue? We don't have a prologue. Another paragraph was written as an epilogue at the end. So there's this paragraph added to the beginning and the end of Esther, and it only shows up in the Apocrypha. Why is that? We don't have that. Well, Esther, first of all, we have to review what we know about the book of Esther. Esther is a very down-to-earth kind of story. Esther could be written today or any day, and that could be the first book you read, and you'd get something out of it because the characters are believable, the situation is real, and all of these things follow a plot line, and then there's a resolution. It's easily digested, and things are straightforward. They don't call people by symbols or anything. It's all straightforward stuff. In fact, there's nothing supernatural in the book of Esther. There's no great miracles. There's no things you can't explain. You can see God's providence if you want to in it, but you don't see supernatural, unexplainable things. Esther is very straightforward and down to earth. It is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God. I don't know if that's intentional with its earthliness. God is implied all the way through, but it doesn't mention God. Well, all right, so that's Esther's nature is kind of this, when you look at Revelation, Esther's kind of boring. I mean, somebody who likes horror movies might say, why are you bothering to go see, the Herbie the Love Bug? So it's a very down-to-earth story about love and hatred and peril, where Esther's uncle Mordecai discovers a plot against the Jewish people. And Esther takes a big risk to call upon the king to rescue them. And in the end, the bad guy is hanged and the good guys are saved. And there's nothing supernatural about it. It's just a good story and it's providential in the hands of God. All right, so that's the book of Esther as we know. And that's inspired. It's in the canon. It's in the Bible. The prologue and the epilogue didn't make it into our Bible. They are apocryphal, of questionable origin. They were written by a writer centuries later. We know that it was written centuries later, after the time of the New Testament. It was written by an author who claimed to be Mordecai. All right, well, now we can put on our hats and say, well, that wasn't really Mordecai if it was 400 years later. But he had a point to make. And in the Septuagint or the Catholic Bible, it's left in there because they think it's a useful point. Well, we're going to find a great clue in this. So this writer who's claiming to be Mordecai, who's a character in the story of Esther, writes this epilogue. Well, and I will stop and say almost all non-inspired apocalyptic literature is written by someone claiming to be someone else. That was a popular form. Enoch, Baruch, it was one of their literary devices. This prologue and epilogue are written in the standard apocalyptic style of the period. That's good for us. It was written in a way that we know what was popular. This falls right in it. Let's see what it tells us. All right, so the writer claims that he had a dream. So in the Catholic Bible, before you get to the story of Esther, this paragraph will show up first as the introduction to the book. This was his dream. There was noise and tumult and thunder and earthquake. Well, we're not surprised by that now, right? Confusion upon the earth. Two great dragons advanced, and both were poised for combat. They uttered a mighty cry, and at their cry, every nation prepared for war to fight against the nation of the just. And it was a dark and gloomy day. Tribulation and distress and great confusion lay upon the earth. Good grief. When I read Esther, I didn't get any of that. Well, this is what he thinks should be the introduction to this down-to-earth story. All right, what did he think the ending should say? Well, he claims that he just had a dream. He says the whole nation of the just was shaken with fear at the evils to come upon them, and they expected to perish. Then they cried out to God from their crying. There arose, as though from a tiny spring, a mighty flood of water, a river. The light of the sun broke forth, and the lowly were exalted, and they devoured the boastful. So that's the paragraph at the end of Esther. I'm thinking, I never got that. But this is how that was. Now, here's what it goes on to say. First, we say, can we make any sense of that story of Mordecai's alleged dream? Well, if you thought about it, you might be able to. But they do it for us. The book of Esther, as we know it, follows that story in the Apocrypha. And at the end of, here's the end paragraph. I'm sorry, that was, the other part was still in the first part, but here's the end. So now here's what his wrap up at the end is with this apocryphal paragraph, epilogue. For I remember the dream I had. Okay, we remember he said he had a dream concerning these matters, and none of them has failed to be fulfilled. So you've read the story of Esther. I didn't see any dragons. How was that fulfilled? All right, well, there was a little spring that became a river, and there was light and sun and abundant water, and the river is Esther. Oh, so that's how I'm supposed to interpret the symbolism. Who the king married and made queen. And the two dragons are people, Haman and myself, Mordecai. The nations are those that gather to destroy the nation of the Jews, the great peril, the earthquake, the triumph. It's just a much more dramatic way of telling the story, or parts of it. And my nation, this is Israel, who cried out to God and was saved.
Amen.
Now you see some apocalyptic writing. You can say, oh, that wasn't so weird after all. It was just, the two dragons. I don't have to be afraid of dragons. I can see that this is describing for those people situations that they were really going through. And by doing it in this language, they not only hid it from their persecutors who couldn't understand, but they also brought forth an emotion. This is how afraid I'm feeling. This is how threatened I'm feeling. This is how disgusted I am at what's going on. This is how ugly things are. And this language describes it better rather than just laying it out in a narrative form. So I love this. I love that this tells me when I'm looking at Revelation, it's talking about real things that real people are feeling. I may or may not be able to understand all the symbols, but boy, I'm not going to take a look now that a dragon's going to come and eat me in my bed tonight because I've been bad. All right, I probably have to stop. I wish I didn't have to. We're going to talk about the Lamb. If you're brave enough to read into it a little further, you're welcome to start at the beginning. Look for the characteristics of letter, of prophecy, preaching and prediction. Look for apocalypse, symbolism, tumult, all that kind of sensationalism. And then, jot down your questions as you start. Know that you're getting an introduction in the first 3 chapters. 4 and 5 will be the strange vision. It'll be Jesus telling the churches what he's thinking about them. And then, as you venture further, you might see some of these great things, like the Lamb, who ends up having 7 horns and 7 eyes. Yes. And for us, if we think, boy, is that really what heaven's going to look like? I'm going to get there and the creature's going to look like that. No, it's going to represent. And then we ask ourselves, what does this represent?
Right.
So thank you for your patience. I hope that's enough to whet your appetite to come back.
Yes.
So read as far as you can, jot down your questions. Remind me to ask for you to give me your questions next time you come. And we'll get further into this. And hopefully we'll get into some of the meat of Revelation and maybe transition a little bit into speculating what some of the symbolisms might have meant to those people at the time.
Okay.
John,
Yes,
what was that specifically? We have an
apocalyptic.
by itself.
Yes, apocalyptic, yeah, apocalypse.
Right.
Yeah, so it's the epistle, prophecy, and apocalypse. Thank you, everyone. We'll, I'll post this online. Tell all your
Reverend
friends.
Jim, I'm
Thank you.
sorry I was late. I had computer problems.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know what book you're talking about starting with. I'm sure you said it in the beginning, but which book do I start with to read?
Well, we're focusing on Revelation, and I know we talked about how that's a kind of an intimidating book and frightening, but the beginning of class helped us to approach it differently. So I don't know if you have an opportunity tonight to tune in and catch the first part of it at 7 o'clock, or if you'll have an opportunity on YouTube to see it after I post it. But hopefully the introduction I give you, Alberta, will help you to feel like the rest of us. We were intimidated and afraid of Revelation, but maybe we don't have to be. And
At
I think,
peace with it? Okay,
yeah, very, very much. Very much.
all right.
Yeah.
And so then what book do I start reading when I get that? I'll be there tonight, but
Okay.
which book do I start reading? Esther?
No, you can read Esther if you'd like. It's a great read. I didn't require anybody to read that. And I really, there was no reading required to come into this first session. What I was thinking is that now we have the session, you can start reading Revelation, the first 4 or 5 chapters.
Okay, so 1 through 5.
Yeah, that would be good. And you might want to watch the class tonight before you even do that, to give you a good introduction.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we're glad to have you with us.
I'm gonna give it a shot until it terrifies me.
If I would end with a prayer, I guess, where's my mind? Let's bow together. Merciful and gracious God, as you reveal yourself and the hidden things to those who need to know them in order to be built up and comforted, help us to grasp what is for us to know and what is for us to trust to you only. We pray that as we go forward, that you would give us motivation and strength as a church family to continue our studies, to continue our mission and our fellowship and worship by inviting others in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
To you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. What happened?
I don't know.
Hi, Shayla. How you feeling? You're on mute, honey. Kathy.
Hi.
Oh, hi, Connie. How you doing? Are you muted?
I'm heading back home Friday.
Oh,
So I got Don's ashes today, and so my other brother Jack is going to help me get home. So
good. I'm glad you got somebody with you. You got a
Yeah.
large family. That's good.
I know, and you've all been so great, and I appreciate it so much. So I will see you
Well,
all soon.
I haven't contacted you on, but I've
It's
been
okay.
praying for you, and every time I hear your name, I give an extra squeeze in my life for you. So
I feel your prayers, and I love you all.
thank you very much. Bye, Kathy.
Thank you. Bye.
Kathy, I'm assuming that you're gonna have to go straight to Marana. You won't be able to come by here.
I'm not sure how that's gonna work, Jim. I'd like to come by there just so Jack can at least see your place.
Okay, well,
So I'll keep you posted, but we're probably gonna come in on a Sunday. So we'll see what time it is.
okay, we'll understand and do what we can either way.
All right, love you.
Love you too.
Bye-bye. A good class, Jim. I already feel a little better. So
Great, thank you.
thank you.
Bye.